Welcome to Literary AF Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Literary AF Podcast. This is Sheldon returning from the Amazon jungle after trying to put out the fires. Here with me is...
Danni.
And we are here to talk to you about books.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say Literary AF already? If not, Literary AF is the name of the podcast. It's a podcast about literary...
Books.
books.
Yeah.
Today we have a special treat for you.
Yes.
We have a special guest.
Oh?
The ghost of Charles Dickens.
Oh.
Everybody give him a warm round of applause. He can hear you at home. He's watching you at all times. No, I just finished reading David Copperfield by Charles Dickens.
Yep. Not about a magician.
No, I believe this book came out 150 years maybe before The Magician.
Okay. Did the magician, take the name? Or was it just oh, no, I guess I picked the name of a famous...
I'm sure he did, because, David Copperfield is, the alter... or kind of, the alias for Charles Dickens himself. Because the book is, a pseudo-autobiography.
Right.
So I wonder if that's, the magician just took that as his alias as well, because it's, a cool alias.
Okay.
It's what the coolest alias a person could have, David Copperfield.
David Copperfield.
I really like the book, but it's very, very long.
Yeah, it took you a couple months to read it.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
And it's I haven't had a ton of time to read lately, but still it's almost, I think it's around 900 pages.
Okay.
And I feel like a lot of our listeners might not get a chance to read it, but it's so good, so I really want to do it justice today. If this episode runs long, strap in, suckers, because I'm going for it anyway.
The last couple have been kind of long, too. Arlene and I have gone on tangents about...
I've listened. I was severely disappointed. I had my
sorry.
watch out, and then once it crossed over the half hour...
Had a timer and you were just tisk-tisking the whole time?
The whole time.
Oh, no.
So, David Copperfield is kind of a complicated book to talk about because it goes through this guy's entire life story, and throughout it, there's a lot of people who he meets, and they'll, be around for a couple chapters, then they'll disappear for a while, and then they'll come back for a couple chapters, and they'll disappear again. And it's you've got all these kind of subplots sort of interwoven together through the different characters. So it's hard for me to just skip over large chunks.
Right.
But it's really good. It's so good. And it's, if you've never read Dickens before, he's got a certain sentimentality to his writing. He's very there's a lot of very sweet moments in Dickens books. And also a lot of kind of overwrought, dramatic moments.
Right.
It reminded me of, Les Mis by Victor Hugo, but not as sad. It's a much happier Les Mis.
Right.
Lay happy, as
Lay
I would
happy.
call it. I'm sorry. Alright. So, the book starts with David being born.
Excellent.
His father is already dead.
Mm-hmm.
His father is the original David Copperfield.
Okay.
His mother is kind of a young, inexperienced, it was one of those old marriages where the dad was or I guess the husband was middle age, and he married a younger girl, possibly in her late teens or early 20s.
As they did.
Yeah, it was kind of common, and I guess it's still not super common, but still happens.
Mm-hmm.
So the father died, so he's left with the mother, and the mother has a servant named Clara Peggotty. Peggotty shows up a lot in this book, so get to know the name Peggotty. As the mother is about to give birth, the late David Copperfield's sister, Betsy Trotwood, shows up. Betsy Trotwood is another character who shows up a lot in this book, so it's another name to remember. She's getting ready for the baby. She's super excited. She believes the baby's going to be a girl and is very once this baby girl will get here, you're going to name him Betsy Trotwood Copperfield. This Betsy Trotwood is going to live a perfect life. You can't mess anything up. She really domineers the actual mother.
Right.
But she's funny domineering. She's not mean.
Right.
But then as soon as the baby is born and she sees this boy, she just walks out of the house and disappears. But the The mom, I don't know if the mother is ever given a name other than just like the mother. She's like young and she's pretty and like David like loves her a lot. The next chapter is like very early childhood and how like he loves being with her and Peggotty is always around. There's a couple chapters kind of like this. At a certain point, David goes with Peggotty to visit Peggotty's family. And Peggotty, so he meets Mr. Peggotty, who is Clara Peggotty's brother. Yeah, I said the name Peggotty is going to come a lot in this book, and it's true. Mr. Peggotty has a nephew, and it's so hard because the book refers to them both as just Peggotty. Like,
yes.
but like it's always clear in context who they mean.
Right.
So I'm never like, oh, which Peggotty is this? But it's going to be hard to talk about because I'll be like, so Peggotty said this, and then Peggotty did that. But anyway, so Mr. Peggotty has a nephew named Ham.
Ham?
Yeah, Mr. Peggotty is like a poor fisherman, and he's got like the affectations of one. So like he talks really weird, and I don't know what Ham's name is actually supposed to be, but he calls him Ham all the time. He also has a girl living there who he says is his niece named Little Emily, which is obviously Emily.
Yeah.
And then there's Mrs. Gummidge.
Okay.
Gummidge, her husband was like a sailing partner with Mr. Peggotty.
Right.
But they got into like a wreck and he died, and so Peggotty's been taking care of this widow.
Right.
David falls in love with little Emily, but because they're both like little kids at this point.
Right.
They're running around the beach. He's having so much fun. David claims to be in love with her for like ever, but after he grows up a little bit, he kind of grows out of that. When David gets home from his holiday, he finds out that his mother has been remarried to a guy named Mr. Murdstone.
Okay.
The Murdstones suck a lot. So this guy, he keeps trying to befriend David, but he's like clearly a jerk.
Right.
And a bit of a scoundrel. He takes... First, Murdstone moves in his sister to live with them. And she's like... I never know how old any of the characters are because like they feel old at the beginning of the book. Which I guess is kind of true to like when you're a kid, everyone older than you seems like they're really old.
Yeah.
But like... These characters also show up like constantly throughout the story. So I'm like, they can't be that old because...
That's true.
When David is in his 30s, he's still interacting with these people. Unless they're like 85 and like still bothering him.
Well, I mean, they could be like young adults at the start.
Yeah.
And then they could be in their 50s, 60s.
Well, I think they're probably in their 30s and then by the end they're like kind of in their 50s or 60s.
Okay.
And anyway, so there's Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone. They're both like obsessed with firmness and strictness. And they're trying to raise David as strictly as they can. They keep trying, like Mr. Murdstone keeps trying to befriend David because he thinks that's the trick to getting with the mom. And so I should have said that earlier, but after he gets married, he like no longer cares about trying to befriend David. And then it's all about like trying to control David.
Right.
They try to educate him, but they're like very cruel about it, and they're very like their rules keep changing and stuff like that. So like they'll be like, I need you to read this phrase, and if he stumbles once, then they freak out on him. And at a certain point, so the mother has been doing most of the work, and she's kind of just getting like bossed around by the Murdstones all the time, to the point where she like starts to lose like her youthful spirit and energy,
right?
And just becomes like this shell of a woman. At one point, Mr. Murdstone himself tries to discipline David, and somehow David ends up biting Murdstone's hand.
Oh, okay.
And drawing blood, and so then Murdstone decides to ship David off to a what's it called, like a school,
a boarding school.
Yeah. And on the way there, he meets a guy named Mr. Barkus. Barkus is a cart driver. Barkus is hilarious. He's so also, well, as David was a child, a lot of people take advantage of him, and it's like kind of sad, but also it's kind of funny. So David gets sent with some money to live and a bunch of food from Peggotty. Barkus eats all the food, and then he starts asking about whoever cooked it. And then when he finds out that it's like this servant who's single, Barkus like is instantly like smitten with Peggotty. And he just keeps telling David, tell Peggotty, Barkus is willing. She'll know what that means. He says it so many times. David has no idea what it means because he's a little kid.
Right.
He goes to an inn on the way to the school. The innkeeper, or the waiter at the inn, basically robs him and steals all of David's like supper at the inn. It's such a weird scene, but David is like a little kid, doesn't know what to do. So as the waiter brings him his food, the waiter's like, it's customary for the waiter to try a piece of the meat to make sure it's cooked to perfection. And David's like, oh, for sure. So then the waiter takes like a bite, and then the waiter's like, it's also customary for the waiter to have a sip of the beer to make sure it's fine. And so basically steals the entire meal. So David arrives at school like the next day, like famished and with no money left because he got robbed by these people who keep trying to help him. But also, I guess that's what you get for sending a 6-year-old to like across the country by himself.
Why was the 6-year-old drinking beer?
Because I think back then, beer was a lot cleaner than water.
Oh.
So,
All right.
I think your options were like beer, wine, or water, mostly. I guess milk, but I'm sure milk was expensive. And, in parts in Europe, little kids still drink beer. I don't know if that's true.
I don't think that's true.
It feels right.
I don't think that's true.
I feel like I've heard that before. All right. Actually, Dave's not 6. He's 8 and 9, according to this thing I'm looking at. He goes to the new school. It's called Salem House. He meets... His first teacher he meets is nice, but I can't remember his name. Mm-hmm. But he's really nice to David and tries to help David. There's also Mr. Creakle, who is like the proprietor of the house or whatever. He's super cruel to all the kids in the house and tries to be very like... He's the one who instilled strictness into Murdstone.
Right.
So that's kind of his thing too. He likes to... he makes David wear a sign that say that David is a biter to watch out. I can't remember what all Creakle does, but Creakle's not a fun person.
No.
While there, David meets James Steerforth, who is going to show up a lot throughout the story. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think his name is James. It's like Jay Steerforth. Whatever, they just call him Steerforth.
Right.
He's like a cool older kid in the school. He's clearly trouble. Like he doesn't listen to his authorities. He's always like mischievous. He gets the nice teacher fired as like just kind of like a dick move.
Right.
And like, but he's like also the cool kid in school, so everyone loves him. He takes to David because he steals David's money again. And he kind of sees David as like sort of like a kid he can kind of control.
Right.
But also like I think they just kind of get along. There's also another kid named Traddles, who is Tommy Traddles, who's always drawing skeletons on his book. When he gets bored, he just doodles, and he's constantly getting punished for it.
Skeletons? Yeah,
he's always getting in trouble for his skeletons, but he never stops. Traddles shows up a lot later and is very important, so that's both of them. At one point, Emily and Ham and Mr. Peggotty show up, and like David's so proud of them, but all the kids at this rich school are like making fun of them. And I don't think David realizes it because David is just like kind of this sweet, innocent child throughout most of the book.
Right.
Even when he's not a child, that's just his sort of personality. But anyway, so Steerforth meets them. And Steerforth is like a dick, but he's like, he puts that like level, like the facade of like kindness on top of it.
Right.
So David is like, oh, he's such a nice guy. Like this Steerforth is great. Eventually, David goes home for the summer or home for Christmas break or something. So it's like a year passes at the school. It just kind of like goes over that whole year.
Right.
And then he goes home and things aren't great at home. David feels like his mother gets in trouble whenever he's around. So he just tries to avoid the Murdstones and the mother. But then that makes the Murdstones mad too. So then David like tries to go and like just not say anything and like just be really quiet, but then that makes them mad too. He's kind of like lose-lose, like he can't do anything right with the Murdstones around. The mother is pregnant again, and I don't know if she's had her when she has the baby, but at a certain point she does have. I can't remember even if she has the baby. The mother dies.
Oh,
basically.
Okay.
So when David gets sent back to school, and then like a week later or 2 weeks later, the mother dies.
Okay.
And David, like, he can just tell that his mom is like this, like, wasting shell of a woman, like under the Murdstone's like cruel reign.
Right.
And so he's trying his best to like make her happy while he's there, but then like she dies, and then the Murdstones are like, "Why are we paying for this kid to be in a boarding school?" So they pull David out of school. He goes home and is, I think he's a servant to them for a while, but eventually, sorry, I'm looking up the actual notes because there's so much that happens in this book. I don't want to like get it all mixed around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whatever. Eventually, he ends up working at Murdstone's warehouse. So he's like, Murdstone owns like a company or a warehouse or a business or something, and he sends David there to work, and David is like not even 10. Or maybe he's exactly 10, I'm not sure. But he's around that age.
Right.
And then so he's like forced to work like long hours. He's a child. This is one of the parts that's directly from Charles Dickens' life. When he was a small child, he was forced to work like child labor.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few like really good quotes in here. Like there's one where he's like, "I can't understand how the system would let a child with so much promise and so much like natural abilities in school." Like he basically lists like all these things. He's like, "I don't understand how the system could let a child with all this promise and all these abilities to wither away in a working house where he never sees the light of day."
Yeah.
And it's like kind of emotional because it's like Dickens actually reflecting on his own childhood.
Mm-hmm.
You meet, like, he introduces a lot of the other kids in the working house. None of them really show up again, so I won't get into them. But he's staying with a couple named the Micawbers, and the Micawbers show up a lot in this book. The Micawbers are really funny. Mr. Micawber thinks he's like an aristocrat, but he's definitely not. Aristocrat. I was thinking of the Disney movie, The Aristocats.
Oh, yeah.
Micawber and his wife, they're both funny. They're always broke, but they're like pretending they're aristocrats. And Mr. Micawber is always like, he's a bit of a scoundrel. Like he's not like stealing from David, but he's also like letting David use some of his salary to help them at their house all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, but they're not like mean about it. It's hard to explain. They're kind of like, they're friendly characters in the book, but they're also like kind of sleazy when it comes to money. Eventually, so David has to work long hours. He's not getting to really keep any of his money, and the money he does keep is going to help the Micawbers. Eventually, David writes Peggotty, like his mom's old servant,
Yep.
to ask her if she knows the address of his aunt, the one who showed up on the day he was born.
Right.
So David, as soon as David gets the address, he decides just to run away. So he leaves London, he leaves the workhouse, and he just on foot walks basically halfway across the country. Actually, I don't know. I don't really know. He walks to Dover, and I don't know how far Dover is from London, but it's implied that he walks a very long way for a small child. He's like, the description of him when he gets there is a dusty, sunburned, half-clothed figure who's like this 10-year-old boy who's just walked all the way. He goes to see his aunt, Miss Trotwood. She sees him as a ragged urchin and tells him to go away. Boys aren't allowed in the house. But eventually he kind of tells her who he is and what like his life has been like. And she tells him that she needs some time to like figure out what to do with him, but eventually takes him into the house.
It is 72.2 miles, and it takes about 24 hours to walk there as an adult.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You know, I think it takes him maybe 3 days in the book because he like stops and sleeps a few times.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a long journey.
Yes.
So Miss Trotwood, so she's really funny. She has this little cottage. She lives with this guy named Mr. Dick, who is He's crazy. I don't know how to explain it, but his like, he has clear mental illness, and she's like, I don't know how she met him or how she knows him, but basically she was like, this guy is like, he's a good person, he's got a lot to offer the world, and if I didn't take care of him, he'd be shipped off to like a sanitarium or like an asylum.
Mm-hmm.
So she keeps him at the house, and she just always introduces him as a remarkable man, and he's a lot of fun. Mr. Dick is a lot of fun. She also has a housekeeper named Janet. I don't know if Janet ever shows up again, but it's really funny. Miss Trotwood is obsessed with her front yard,
Mm-hmm.
and for some reason, donkeys keep walking over her front yard, and she loses it every time. So they freak out about the donkeys, and they're constantly going and attacking these donkeys. David stays at the house for a while, and he like starts his education up again under Mr. Dick. Mr. Dick is like trying to be a writer, but every time he starts writing, he gets really distracted because he thinks the ghost of King Charles the First is torturing him.
Okay.
Yeah, he's crazy.
All right, sure.
So, and like David doesn't. I don't think David knows he's crazy at first, and then but the reader like is old enough or smart enough to understand what's going on. Eventually, the Murdstones show up to ask where David is, and Trotwood just like loses it on them, and she like totally owns Miss Murdstone, who's like the grumpy sister, and they're so offended they just abandon David. They're just totally gone. And after that point, Trotwood decides to sign David up for an actual school. He moves in with people called the Wickhams, I think.
Okay.
Wickfield.
Oh.
Wickham is Pride and
Pride and
Prejudice.
Prejudice.
So there's Mr. Wickfield, who's like, I believe he's a lawyer, and he has a daughter named Agnes, who is David's age. Mr. Wickfield also has a guy working for him named Uriah Heep. These characters all show up a ton throughout this book. Uriah Heep is like kind of like this creepy, weird dude. Apparently this is the first description of him after David shakes his hand. Oh, what a clammy hand his was, as ghostly to touch as to the sight. I rubbed mine afterwards to warm it and to rub his germs off. So he doesn't like Uriah Heep right from the start, and
Right.
he's just like really creepy, and he always talks about how humble he is. The only people that you really introduce to while David's in this school is Dr. Strong, who is the schoolmaster, and his young pretty wife Annie. Annie also has this cousin named Jack Maldon, and apparently there's all this like scandal because Annie's always hanging around with her younger cousin, and she's so much younger than the doctor, and it's like heavily implied that there's an affair going on.
Right.
But Dr. Strong is really nice and really kind to David, and David also introduces Dr. Strong to Mr. Dick, and they become really good friends, which is kind of funny. Throughout this time, like, David is good friends with Agnes. Agnes is like, he calls her like his sister. He always describes her with these terms like, wherever there's goodness, peace, and truth, that's where Agnes is, and stuff like that. Uriah is always like trying to interfere with the business, and he's constantly getting Mr. Wickfield drunk. Like, Mr. Wickfield is basically an alcoholic, but then David sees that's Uriah who's always giving him the booze.
Mm-hmm.
We jump forward a few years. David finishes school. He meets up with Steerforth again, his old friend from like the younger school. Steerforth is like kind of like a wild like party boy and kind of drags David into that lifestyle a little bit. David starts working for the Commons, which is like church court, I think.
Okay.
So he's like a church lawyer.
Okay.
I guess that's a thing. He meets Mr. Macabre again. I don't know. I'm just going through this list to see what happens. How long is... Oh, we're already getting pretty long. I'm going to try to skip ahead to like more important stuff. So as he's training to be a lawyer, his boss is Mr. Spenlow, or that's one of his bosses. He's another really important character. Sorry, I lost my page here. He's partying with Steerforth. He's training to be a lawyer or a church lawyer with Spenlow. He goes with Steerforth to Yarmouth or wherever the Peggities are. Oh, also Miss Peggotty marries Barkis. I forgot to say that before. She marries Barkis, and that's a thing. And Mr. Barkis apparently is like kind of rich because he like hoards all the money he makes.
Ah, okay.
And so he just like he works as like a guy who transports people around. He's a bus driver before buses.
Right.
And he saves every penny he makes in a little box that Peggotty pretends that she doesn't know where it is. But every time David needs money, she goes and gets him some.
Okay.
So him and Steerforth go to this town. Steerforth becomes like obsessed with like riding boats and stuff like that and like sailing, and he thinks he could become a fisherman out in this village. But he's also like clearly a dick to all the like poor people there. And Mr. Peggotty is like, he's so wonderful, and I love the way he talks. He's like, "Oh, Master Davy, little Master Davy," and Ham and Emily are supposed to be married, or they're engaged. And then David goes. So David's there with Steerforth, but then David goes to check on Peggotty and Barkis because Barkis is dying. He's totally laid up with gout, I think, or like some kind of arthritic disease, and can't move at all, and is like slowly dying. He's trying to help Peggotty take care of Barkis. Eventually Barkis dies. I don't know if this... Oh, I guess it happens a little later. David also meets Steerforth's family. There's his mother, who is like obsessed with Steerforth, who's like, everything her son does is perfect and he can do no wrong. And there's also Rosa Dartle, who is a woman like David's age, who Steerforth one day got mad and like slashed her with a knife or something. Like she's permanently disfigured.
Right.
And so the Steerforth's like letting her stay there. But the mother still thinks that her son can do no wrong, even though it's like he's clearly scarred this poor woman.
Right.
Dartle is like, David thinks that she's really clever, but he's also like kind of afraid of her because she's like, well, she's a super volatile person. She like, yeah. Later you see she's not a good person. And then Steerforth also has this servant named Mr. Litimer, who is like always dressed up like full tuxedo and is always like right behind Steerforth, whatever he needs, and he's always super professional, but he's also creepy, which I think David realizes pretty soon. Anyway, as he's back, he's trained to be a lawyer. He meets Spenlow's daughter. Spenlow was his boss. He meets his daughter Dora, and he falls for Dora like instantly. He loves Dora. He can't stop thinking about Dora. The whole like middle section of the book is Dora. Everything Dora. He's obsessed with her. He one day, and he's always trying to like run into her, but he doesn't want to ask his boss to invite him over because that's weird. So he's just like constantly hanging out downtown, like trying to run into Dora.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I think that happens in Northanger Abbey. One of the Austen books, that was also a thing where they were just hanging out downtown hoping to run into the person.
Right.
But yeah, so he's always trying to run into Dora. He's obsessed with Dora. He's got this little apartment in the city with a weird servant who's always robbing him and never like making him food. And David gets taken advantage of so much throughout the book. It's kind of funny. He meets up with Traddles again, who is living with the Macabres. Traddles is his other friend from when he was a little kid. Traddles is now trained to be a lawyer, but he's like poor, so he's trying to like make the money to take the bar exam or whatever.
Right.
And the Macabres are also still like trying to take advantage of him. David, like, they have this really fun party, and then at the end of the night, David pulls Traddles aside and be like, "Hey, I know Mr. Macabre is a great person, but whatever you do, don't lend them anything." And then Traddles is like, "I have nothing to lend," and then David's like, "You have a name, and they will use your name to, like, acquire loans and stuff from the bank. Like, don't sign anything, don't give them anything." And then Traddles admits that he already has done that for them. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's what the Macabres are up to. Steerforth shows up again, and this time I think maybe David goes out to visit the Peggottys and finds out that Steerforth has been in town. Mm-hmm. I don't remember exactly how this goes down, but basically, Steerforth has seduced little Emily
Oh.
and has ran off with her.
Okay.
He's kind of a bit of a Wickham character in the story. Rosa Dartle, the girl that he scarred, is furious about it. The family is like totally, they don't know what to do. Like Peggotty doesn't know what to do. Ham is devastated because Ham was supposed to marry Emily. Mr. Peggotty is like, he like was super devoted and loved Emily. Like that was his niece, and he decides that he's just going to wander the country until he can find her. And like he doesn't really have a plan. He just like grabs his stuff and just like starts walking. And throughout the book, like David runs into him like a few times, and he's always like staying at a random inn or just like wandering the streets of London, and he's just constantly looking for Emily. So that's what happens. That's one major subplot of the story. Dora is another major subplot of the story. And the main story is David, like, he's becoming an author. So when he's in the church commons, oh, yeah, this is a pretty major event. His auntie loses everything. So she was living in the cottage in the town. She owned her own land and stuff. But because Wickfield, the guy who David used to stay with, he was managing the aunt's money for her, and he somehow lost it all. But that will come up again later. So the aunt loses all her money. David thinks he's going to have to drop out of like his training, try to get his money back, and the Spenlow won't give him his money back. So he's basically stuck at his job, or stuck at his training, not making any money, and he can't get the money back from his training. So David starts like trying to get work wherever he can, and one thing he does is he finds Dr. Strong, who needs like an assistant, because Dr. Strong is trying to make a dictionary, which I think Strong's English Dictionary is actually a thing. I don't know, but maybe it's because it's based loosely on Dickens' actual life.
Right.
I'm sure Dickens actually did help somebody write a dictionary back then.
Right.
Dickens. David also starts attending like political debates and stuff, and like writing out the notes for the newspapers, and like basically transcribing it down, and that's how he starts getting into writing. Which because it's based on Charles Dickens' life, that ends up being pretty important later. So Steerforth's ran away with Emily. Traddles and Macabre are living together. There's so much happening in this book, it's hard to keep track. Dora. Okay, so then David gets invited over to a party at Spenlow's house. And David actually gets to spend some alone time with Dora. And it goes very well for David. There's other guys who are trying to hit on Dora, and David is like... The whole chapter is so funny, because he's like... He feels like he's in like this death combat with these other men. Like trying to hold them off and like trying to like distract them or like sabotage their plans to get close to Dora. And eventually, by the end of the chapter, it's revealed that Dora is also in love with David. So they start a secret romance where they're like writing each other letters. Dora has a friend who lives close to David, so whenever she goes to visit her friend, she writes David a letter, and then he goes to visit her at that house. They start the secret romance. Eventually, though, Spenlow, like David's boss, finds out that David's been seeing his daughter behind his back. Spenlow puts an end to the engagement, says you can't... Oh, they get engaged too, but it's like a very like childish like...
Secret engagement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Spenlow puts an end to it. David is distraught. He doesn't know what to do. He's like in the lowest dumps. Peggotty comes to take care of him because he's a total loss. The aunt is also like there with him. Then what happens next? I think at a certain point, I don't know if it's right then or if it's a little later, Spenlow like dies suddenly. Like the boss dies.
Right.
And then Dora is going to live with her aunts, and Dora won't talk to David because she's just devastated about her father dying. David is still working at the firm, or like training at the firm where Spenlow was. So David kind of has to help like with execute the will and stuff like that. So that's all happening. he eventually, with the help of his aunt and he writes, and Agnes helps too, his old childhood friend. He writes a letter to Dora's aunts, like begging to see her, and explains the whole situation to them. They decide that if David like impresses them, basically they'll be okay with him being actually engaged to Dora. Mm-hmm. So they arrange a meeting. David goes with Traddles because he thinks Traddles is like a good friend to bring along to this adventure for some reason.
Right.
I should also mention Dora has a little dog named Yap, I think.
Yap?
Yap or Jip, or it's like some like 3-letter word, and it ends with a P. I know that.
Okay.
Yip. I don't know. She's got a dog, and the dog is tiny and always bites David and hates David.
Right.
And hates everyone. It's a terrible little dog. But Dora loves it. So eventually it works out with Dora. The two of them get married. David is so happy. He's also started doing actual writing at this point. Like he's writing like short stories and like serials and stuff for the newspaper, which will come in very important later. I think it's so Peggy's still looking for Emily. Steerforth is still missing with Emily. The Micawbers. Oh, Mr. Micawber, he goes and starts working for the Wickfield and Uriah Heep. Uriah Heep is now like the partner of the firm. Oh, Uriah sucks. He keeps showing up, and he's like, every time he wants to marry Agnes, he wants to get control of the firm, and he's basically like turned Wickfield into like a useless drunk. And
so he's like the villain?
Yeah, he's kind of the villain of the book.
Okay.
Takes over the firm. He's trying to marry Agnes, and he thinks David is like competition for Agnes. And then once he finds out that David's married another girl, then he's like very happy, and he has like this big party, and David, or I don't know how it happens, but basically David gets dragged into going, and Wickfield is like talking the whole night about how he's going to marry Agnes and that David can't stop him now. And David was like, I was never trying to stop you, but also he hates Uriah, and he like loves Agnes like a sister,
right? So
he doesn't want it to happen. Uriah just sucks, and eventually David slaps him in the face.
Good.
It's pretty satisfying.
Perfect.
But Micawber started to work there. At a certain point, I'm gonna mess up the order of this stuff, but whatever. Dora and David, they're like trying to live together and like be married. Well, they are married, and they've got a house together, but their servants are constantly taking advantage of them, and like David doesn't know what to do, and he wishes that his wife would do more around the house, but she's very like immature and naive and doesn't want to do anything at all to help.
Right.
And also like, so this is kind of creepy, but she asks David to refer to her as his child bride or child wife.
What?
Yeah, because she's like an innocent little child, and I'm like, yeah, that's not good.
No, not at all.
It's such a creepy term.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Oh, it's my little child wife.
Nope.
But it becomes clear that Dora is still a child in like mentally, like her maturity level is very low.
Right.
And she's not willing to help at all. And it's like David still loves her, but it's like he adores her it's like puppy love kind of thing.
Right.
And they're getting taken advantage of left and right. They're constantly getting into fights because David wants her to like stand up to the servants, and David wants her to like keep a closer eye on things at home because he's still working like 3 jobs trying to help his aunt out and trying to pay for his education. Mm-hmm. But Dora's just like not very helpful. Eventually though, Dora gets sick. She starts to like, David is like trying to help Peggotty find Emily. David is trying to deal with Micawber and the like Uriah Heep situation. Mm-hmm. And Traddles is also like married or engaged to this girl, but her family so he's engaged to this girl named Sophie, and Sophie has to take care of her 12 sisters, I think. Like she has a ton of siblings. And
Too many.
Yeah.
Too many.
But also the parents don't do anything, so basically Sophie has to take care of all the siblings.
It's one of those the children raise the siblings situation.
Yeah. And so Traddles wants to marry her, but the family won't let her because then she'll be gone.
Right.
So David is like trying to help out with that situation too. He's also helping with Dr. Strong and the writing dictionary, all this stuff. And I can't remember where I was going with that, but David is very busy doing all this stuff. I think I'm just going to wrap up these storylines and then we'll call it an episode. But so Steerforth, there's been reports that Steerforth has been found. And, Litimer comes back. That's what it is. So Steerforth's like lapdog servant who follows him around everywhere has arrived home.
Okay.
And he tells the story that basically Steerforth and Emily have been traveling around Europe. They stayed in like the Swiss Alps for a while. They stayed like on the like Italian coast and stuff like that, I think.
Right.
And then Steerforth just got bored with Emily and just like basically wanted her to go away. So Steerforth made a plan that he was going to go and become a fisherman and sail on the seas, and that Emily could marry Litimer, and that would be her like redemption because she'd be marrying a guy who has some like social standing.
Right.
But Litimer is like an old creep.
Okay.
And she doesn't want to, and she hates him, and so she runs away. Steerforth gets mad at Litimer, and I think beats him, and then Litimer gets sick of it, and he leaves Steerforth's service, so he goes back to Steerforth's mom and Rosa Dartle to tell them what happened. Rose is furious because she's always mad. The mom like is in denial because she thinks her little angel can do no wrong and blames Emily for the whole thing. There's also a scene earlier that I forgot where David takes Peggotty to talk to Mrs. Steerforth to find out like if she knows anything about her son's location or like to try to see if she'll help Peggotty in any way. And she basically is like, why would you bring this poor person in front of me? What's wrong with you, David? And then they really trash hard on Peggotty and on David. And David is like, oh, you people are actually scum. I realize that now. So anyway, that's what happened. And so now they're like going to like, I don't know. They're trying to find Emily. And that's like a big thing. So they think Emily's going to come back to England. Right. So they're looking around everywhere. They find this girl named Martha who showed up earlier in the story. She's homeless for the most part, and I can't remember. I think they met her back in like Emily's hometown, and she was like jealous of Emily or something.
Okay.
But anyway, they find Martha, and they're like, "Listen, we don't think you're as bad as everyone else does. We just need your help finding Emily. If she shows up in London, because she'll be probably homeless, if you see her on the street somewhere, please find us and let us know." And Martha's like so honored that anyone would like trust her with anything that she's like devotes herself to this task.
Right.
Dora's getting sicker. And it's very subtle how they make Dora sick, which I noticed was just like David's going on these adventures and like Dora's just like staying at the house more and more, and the aunt is staying to take care of Dora. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you realize like Dora hasn't left the house in like a good many chapters.
Right.
And that the aunt is always taking care of her.
Mm-hmm.
The aunt, by the way, calls Dora her little blossom and is always like trying to help her, and the dog absolutely hates the aunt.
Sounds like the dog just hates everybody.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Next is with Uriah Heep. So he's like trying to like blackmail David now because of David attacked him. But David for the most part just doesn't care. David's also like starting to get some renown as a writer because I think he's written his first book and it was doing very well. Which I can't remember what it would actually be in real life. I don't know if Oliver Twist was Dickens' first book, but it might have been. Anyway, so so he's like starting to get some renown, starting to become kind of famous as a writer, and Uriah Heep's trying to sabotage him. Eventually, though, it comes out that Micawber, who's been working as the assistant, has all these receipts of Uriah Heep like doing shady things, and can basically prove that Heep is the one who lost Miss Trotwood her house. So David's aunt lost her house because of Heep. Mm-hmm. Heep like copied Wickfield's signature to like give him more power than he should have had. They found out all this stuff, and thanks to like Agnes and what's his face, Micawber, they're able to like sort of get all this stuff together on Heep, and then they confront him with Traddles, who's now like an actual lawyer, mm-hmm. or else he's he's almost a lawyer. I can't remember, But so it's like they all get together, they confront Heap, they make him, like, they order him to pay back everything to Miss Trotwood, and also to the money he owes to Macabre, and the money he owes to Wickfield and all this stuff. He tries to, like, fight back by getting Macabre arrested, because Macabre was, like, signing some of these documents too.
Mm-hmm.
And every time the police show up to arrest Mr. Macabre, being like, you owe this person 120 pounds, your name is on the signature, David and Traddles would just pay it off so that the cops would leave. Mm-hmm. So it'd be like, okay, he doesn't owe this money anymore, here's the money to pay them back. And they decide that it would be best if... Oh, they've also found Emily at this point, I should say. Emily's arrived, Rosa Dartle's confronted her, and, like, screamed at her and said, like, you've ruined Steerforth, like, how dare you ruin a man of such potential. And, like, Emily's, like, freaking out, like, she's, like, doesn't know what to do. And then just at that moment, Mr. Peggotty walks in, and basically, like, Rosa goes running, Peggotty and Emily are, like, reunited, and then they all decide that Peggotty, Emily, what's his face, and the Macabres, they're all going to go to Australia to live in the colony.
Okay.
And, like, basically just, like, start a new life, like, away from all the trouble.
Right.
Uriah Heep is still trying to get Macabre arrested. They still, like, keep paying off the police so that they'll leave. And then as they're about to leave, there's a horrible storm. And I can't remember. David is in Peggotty's hometown again. I can't remember why. Maybe visiting, like, Miss Peggotty, the sister, his mom's old servant. Mm-hmm. And as the storm is happening, then it's basically like there's a ship that's wrecked in the cove, and people are freaking out about it. So they all, like, go run. There's a guy who's hanging off the mast, and they're trying to, like, save him. Ham dives into the water to save him. Ham drowns. Ham dies. And they found out that the guy who was stuck on the boat who dies was Steerforth. So Steerforth is dead. Ham is dead. And then David doesn't tell the others before they leave to Australia, because he's like, he doesn't want to wreck their trip before they go. Somewhere at this point, Dora dies, and David is, like, very broken up about it. I think it was slightly before that, actually, that Dora died. Mm-hmm. And so this adventure was kind of like David distracting himself. With all the, like, major stories kind of wrapped up, David decides to travel for a bit, and for, like, I think he's gone for, like, 3 years. He just goes to, like, the Swiss Alps, and he goes, like, across Europe, and he's writing books, and he's sending them to Traddles, who publishes them for him.
Right.
In David's absence, he becomes, like, a pretty big literary figure. I think without even him really realizing it. Like, when he gets home, like, Traddles has, like, tons of letters for him by, like publishers and, like, fans and, like, people who want to use David Copperfield's name so that they can, like, cash in on his success.
Right.
And so David's, like, kind of, like, a big deal now. Traddles has married Sophie. His aunt has got her house back finally. Mr. Dick is still working on his memoirs, but keeps getting distracted by King Charles I. It's kind of like all the characters are, like, sort of happy, and, like, the Macabres are doing well out in Australia. Mr. Peggotty's doing well. And it's at this point where David, like, finally realizes that Agnes is the one he should be in love with, because Agnes is perfect for him, and she's, like, this sweet, wonderful person who's been supporting him all along. That's one thing throughout this book, is I was always like, go for Agnes. Agnes is the one. And Dora's, like, kind of annoying, but Agnes is, like, kind of perfect. And he eventually realizes it, but he thinks that she's attached to somebody else, because apparently she mentioned to the aunt at one point that she was in love with somebody.
Right.
And so David's, like, trying to, like, ascertain who this person is.
It's actually him.
It's him.
Yeah.
Of course he doesn't realize it for, like, 5 chapters.
Right.
But he's, like, keeps trying to find out, and then then she won't tell him, and he, like, confronts her about it, and she starts crying. And then when she's crying, he's like, oh, wait, I think I know what's going on. And so he, like, keeps pushing her a little bit more until finally he's like, what if I was to tell you that I was in love with you? And she was like, what, really? So that was a fun little way to end the book.
Right.
He marries Agnes. I'm guessing Agnes was made super perfect because if it was an autobiography, it was probably his current wife.
Yeah.
so he couldn't like make her like a bad figure in the book. But yeah, that's mostly the book. It ends with him and Agnes are married. They have kids. Peggotty comes back for a visit, and he's like an old man now, but he updates them on how everything's going in Australia with the others. And it's... I don't know if I made the book sound interesting, but it is. It's like a lot of... like, there's all these characters, and they all have their little subplots, and they're like... It's constantly like switching between them and kind of interweaving them together.
Mm-hmm.
And David is like... he's going on all these little adventures with his friends, or he's like confronting this person, or he's like trying to figure out what's happening with Steerforth, and it's like there's a lot going on, and it's really charming, and by the end I just loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the length is intimidating, and that book could have easily been 200 or 300 pages shorter and been just as good.
Yeah.
Like, I recently read Great Expectations, and it's less than half the length,
mm-hmm.
and it's probably just as good a story.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's a lot of fun. If you have the energy for a big long book, I would suggest it. It's got a pretty sweet ending. I like the characters. I'd say it's one of Dickens' best books, but you just have to be willing to sludge through 800, 900 pages.
900 pages, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a trek.
Yeah. Okay, we are way over time.
How over time are we?
We're at 51 minutes.
Okay.
So this is a special double episode. Is there anything you want to like ask or whatever about the book, or?
I think he covered it pretty extensively.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Unless
hard.
there's like any points you wanted to make about the book.
I read some, like, the book has some criticism in the back. Like, it's got some essays from like George Orwell and Virginia Woolf and like a few other like authors who kind of criticized the book.
Right.
One of them brings up like that Dickens is like overly sentimental, and I'd say like that's kind of true, but also I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for an author to have like sentimentality and like emotion in their books.
Yeah. It's like you said, it was an autobiography.
It is.
So that's gonna be sentimental.
Exactly, and it's hard to like, I don't know. It's hard to leave out. I don't know. What was going with that? I was actually thinking of something else. Somebody else criticized the book for like, oh, they made the certain characters, they made them into like heroes when normally in a Dickens book they would stay villains the whole time.
Right.
Like Macabres. The Macabres are like scoundrels, and they're like stealing money from like, or not stealing, but like taking advantage of David and his friend.
Right.
But then it's like, yeah, if he knows them in real life, he's gonna want them to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't want to just make them into bad people.
Yeah.
And there's one character in particular who's named Miss Moucher. I didn't get into her because she's not super important.
Mm-hmm.
At the very beginning of the book, she's kind of a like villainous character.
Right.
And or when David first meets her, and then apparently the woman who it's actually based on read it and complained, and then at the end of the book, she like kind of dies a hero.
Okay.
But again, she doesn't serve a super important part in the plot. But it's like, of course, if he actually knows these people, if they're based on real life, he's not going to write them to be terrible.
Right.
I mean, other than like Uriah Heep and Litimer and like those guys. But yeah, I don't know. It's and I feel like there's a lot of like, there's very rarely in life where you meet someone who's like a pure villain. Like, often people will be like kind of a jerk, but also like they'll have some good moments and stuff like that. For me, I really liked the romance in the book. I really liked all the characters and the way they kind of flow together. I really like the whole becoming an author aspect. Like, as someone who kind of wants to do that myself, like, it's really interesting to read like how Dickens did it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I like in the middle, like when he's grinding, he's doing like 3 jobs, and he's also like writing on the side.
Yeah.
For me, that was like, if I actually ever wrote anything, that could be me. But we are way over time.
Right.
If you like classic books, I would definitely recommend it. It is worth the length. But yeah, where can people find us, Danny?
You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, Literary AF.
Mm-hmm.
Our Gmail is literaryafpod@gmail.com. And I'm on Twitter at LiteraryAFPod.
Great. And did you say Facebook?
And Facebook at LiteraryAF.
You always forget that one. Yeah, so
I don't know. I cannot remember that one for the life of me.
follow us on the social medias. Tune in next week when we talk about
the Psy-Changeling series by Nalini Singh.
And also where I will do an impression
Oh.
of a duck caught in... I don't know what I was going to say, but it was probably bad. I will be doing no impressions next episode.
No impressions next episode.
Do not hold me to that. You can donate to our Patreon at...
Oh, we don't have one.
We don't have one.
No.
At patreon.com. And you can Venmo us money at...
I don't have one of those either.
Another do I. And also, feel free to write us a letter at I'm not giving my address out online.com.
You could just use the Gmail, which I've already plugged, yeah.
Great. Okay, so thank you and bye.
Bye.